Hi everybody, this video is going to cover lesson 2.2, which is solving inequalities. In this video, I'm only going to go over 5 out of the 8 inequalities just to save a little bit of time. I think a lot of us know this. If you want to see a video that has all of them worked out, I have an alternative video you can watch. But let's go ahead and get started on number 1. First of all, I do have some notes over here in the margin. I will explain those kind of as we go, but basically the gist here is that we've been starting with using these parentheses and brackets with interval notation. We are also going to use them when we graph number lines. So that's all going to come into play with this lesson as well. Even though we've already learned those a little bit in interval notation, I think we all need practice as well. So number 1, again, remember there's 2 methods to go about solving when you have a distributive property. You could distribute it, but I think the faster way on this one, because both sides are divisible by 2, let's just divide out the 2. Gets rid of that 2, and we are left with 5m plus 5 is less than 45. Now we just have to solve this inequality. Remember that solving inequalities is a lot like solving equations. You just do the exact same thing, you just have to keep your signs pointing the correct way. And that's kind of one of the major things in this lesson is which way do we point the signs. All right, so we subtract our 5, we get down to 40. So we divide by 5 again, we get down to m is less than 8. Okay, there's my answer. I'm going to come down and put that on my number line. It doesn't really matter how you set up your number line. You can count by whatever you want to count by. I just started down at 5 because that puts the 8 kind of towards the middle. So that's why I did that. Now we also do want to use these rules. And these rules, like I said, they're the same as the rules we've been working with so far on intervals. But basically, if it's just a less than, we used to use an open dot with that. We are not going to use the open dot here. We're going to use parentheses instead. And so I'm going to say m is less than 8. That means everything which is less than 8. So I'm going to put a parenthesis here, and I'm going to go this way. And so I'm using parentheses instead of an open dot. The line itself, some of you put that line on top of the number line, which is fine. Some of you like to kind of hover it above there. That's fine too. I have it there so you can see it a little bit better. But you also have to think about what that inequality means. M is less than 8 means everything that's less than 8 is going to be an answer. Okay, so we have it here as an inequality. We also have it on the number line. We also are going to stop using this, well, not entirely, but in addition to the inequality, we're going to say it as a interval. And so the interval here means it's going from negative infinity all the way up to 8. And of course, we always use the parentheses with infinities, and the 8, again, there is no equal sign, so I'm putting a parenthesis there on the end. So my interval answer looks like this, my inequality looks like this, and my number line looks like this. Okay, number 2, if you take a minute to look at number 2, there are several things that we could start with. A variety. And you know, it doesn't really matter which one you start with. I actually am going to start with moving this 3. I don't know why, it just kind of bugs me that that 3 is there. So I'm going to start by moving that. That's going to give me now 4 times 4k minus 6 on the left side and 9 plus 5k on the right. Okay, I'm going to look at what I have and see, can I divide off that 4? Well, if I did that, it's going to give me a fraction. So in this case, I'm not going to. I'm going to go ahead and distribute it off. All right, so now I have 16k minus 24, less than or equal to 9 plus 5k. Okay, I want all my variables on the left, all my numbers on the right. With equations, it doesn't really matter so much which side things are on, but with inequalities, it's a little bit more important to keep the variables on the left. So I'm going to subtract that 5k to make sure that's on the left first. All right, I was kind of running out of room here, but I'm going to add that 24 now to both sides. Going to give me 11k is less than or equal to 33. Divide by 11, and I get k is less than 3. Less than or equal to 3. So again, I'm going to go to my number line. I'm going to number on there so that the 3 is kind of towards the middle. So I started at 0, but just as long as your 3 is on there, kind of in the middle of it is fine. It says k is less than or equal to 3. So here's my 3. It has an equal to, so we want to use the squared off brackets. And it says less than, so we're going this way. One thing is, notice the point is pointing towards the left. This arrow is also pointing towards the left. And then my interval notation would be to say it's going from negative infinity all the way up to positive 3. It does include the 3, but of course you can never get to infinity. So here's my interval. here is my inequality, and there is my graph, and all of those are part of my solution. All right, number 4. I chose number 4 when I was choosing which ones to do because it's a fraction, and I know that people need practice of fractions. I'm going to start off by adding 6 to both sides. Remember then, when you're deciding what to do first, if you think about PEMDAS, and of course, multiplying and dividing are on the same level, adding and subtracting are on the same level. But basically, when you are solving, you always start down here with the adding and subtracting. You do your adding and subtracting first, and then you do your multiplying and dividing, and so forth. So I'm going to add that 6 because that's down here on this level. That's where I start. You do PEMDAS backwards. Now that I've added that 6, I now need to get rid of that 16, and the way I do that is I multiply by 16 over 1. Of course, 16 over 1 is the same as 16. So now the 16s cancel out, and we are left with x is greater than negative 16. Once again, I need to set up my number line. Okay, I counted by 2s just to, it was too scrunched in there. I couldn't write that small. So greater than negative 16 means it's going to the right. It's greater than. And again, there's no equals, and so it has a parenthesis on it. We're not using open dot, close dot anymore. We're using these. And so now my interval says it starts at negative 16 and it goes all the way up to infinity. Infinity never has a square, it's always rounded, and this one also is rounded. So again, my answers, I have the inequality, I have the interval, I have the graph. Okay, as we were working through those, some of you might have been thinking, wait a second, aren't we supposed to flip the sign? And when do we flip the sign? Especially like on number 4, you probably were thinking about that because there was a negative 1. So that's what we need to talk about now is when do we flip the sign? And so I have these rules written out here. This is when you actually are supposed to switch the inequality sign. The times when you would do it is when you multiply or divide by a negative and when you move a variable from one side of the equation to the other side. And I'll show you some examples of that. So let's just start with number 5. I'm going to start off with adding that 7 just to get it off of there. Okay, and again, I like to think of should I divide or not. 90 is divisible by 6. It's just the thing that I don't have in my head right now, although I think it's 15, isn't it? Okay, so let's go ahead and divide that. Notice, when we divide, we are dividing by a negative 6. So we really have to be careful because if we're dividing by a negative, that's when we flip that sign to make it point the other way. So now my sign's going to point the other way because I divided by negative 6. So those negative 6 cancel off. I get a 1 minus 2n. On this side, I get 15. Okay, I need to continue on with my problem. So I need to subtract 1. So now I know I'm kind of scrunching into the other area here, but that's all I got. We're going to have a negative 2n greater than 14. Oh boy, I just switched it over, but now I have to divide again, so I have to switch it over again. So I'm going to divide by negative 2. And again, when I do that, I have to point my sign the other way. So I point it the other way, and I get n is less than negative 7. Okay, I need to go to my number line and put things on there. Again, it doesn't really matter how you do this. I try to keep my number, whatever it is, kind of towards the middle. So less than negative 7 means here's my negative 7. It's a parenthesis because there's no equals, and it's pointed that way. My interval for that is going to be from negative infinity all the way up to negative 7. Parentheses on both of those. And those are both answers to number 5. Okay, let's talk a little bit. We haven't talked about checking answers yet. Since we're not doing number 7 in this video, I'm going to use this space. To check your answer, there's a couple things you need to check. One thing I think everyone knows is to check the negative 7. So I'm going to check that negative 7 by plugging it back into the original, which is way up here. I might have some space up there. Oh good, I've got a little bit of space up there. I'm going to do my number 5 check up here. So I'm going to take that negative 7 and I'm going to plug it into the whole original equation. When you check your answer, it's always good just to do the original and the entire thing of the original equation, just to make sure that you have everything covered. If you pick someplace down the line, it's possible you made a mistake somewhere else, and then that's not going to be very helpful. Okay, so I'm going to plug in that negative 7, and I'm just going to put all that into my calculator and see if it comes out. And here's the deal. When I plug it in, is it going to be less than negative 7? And negative 97? It's actually not. It should be equal to. So when we're plugging it in, we're plugging in to see if it is equal to. So I'm going to take a second to do that. Okay, so I did that a couple steps in my head, but 6 times 15 is 90. That's a negative, and that is negative 97. So when you check an answer, you're just checking the equals part of it, okay? Even though there was no equals originally here. But that's what we're saying. We're saying if we plug it in, does this side equal this side? It does. But of course, we don't want to know if it equals it. We actually want to know if, if the shading is right, if everything's less than it. I'm going to try to pick a number that's an easy thing to plug in on the less than side. So I went ahead and erased my work from a minute ago. But I think for me, an easy one to do in my head might be negative 10. That just to me seems like an easy number. You can pick anything that's down here. Negative 100, negative whatever. Okay, anything down here. So I'm going to plug negative 10 into my inequality and see if it still is pointing the right way. So I'm going to plug this in. I'm going to do a little bit of it in a couple of steps because I think I can do some of this in my head. I have 1. Now this is a plus, 1, that's a 21. Okay, negative 7 minus, I don't know what number this is, but it's like, well, it's 126, isn't it? So it's a negative 7 minus 126. Is that less than negative 97? It is. It's going to be like a negative 133, right? So yes, so that's checking your shading. If you just plug in the number itself, you're checking to see like the starting point of it. But to check the shading, which direction you're going, you would plug in another number farther down the line. And that will give you the answer to see if your shading is correct. And that's going to be important because this whole concept is switching the sign. Did we switch it the right way? Okay, that was number 5. Let's move on to number 8. Okay, I've said this a couple times. People don't like fractions. I don't love fractions either. So you know what? The way I get rid of them is I multiply by the reciprocal. That's how we always get rid of fractions, is multiply by the reciprocal. The 4's are going to cancel, so I get a negative 8 plus y, less or greater than or equal to, this time, negative 16. Okay, I'm going to take a minute to do some solving here. I'm going to add 8 to both sides. All right, when I add that 8, I get y is greater than or equal to negative 8. So I go to my negative 8, I draw my line, it's greater than, so it's pointing to the right, so this is pointing to the right. It has an equal, so it has a squared off bracket, which means that my interval is from negative 8 to positive infinity. It's kind of hard sometimes to draw 8s and infinities in the same sentence. But that is my answer. And I realize now as I've done this that actually we never did one of the second kind that I said I was going to tell you about when you move it from left to right. So we can either look at number 7 or number 6 to see an example of that. Okay, remember, if you wanted to see other ones worked out, I have a longer version that I will put on YouTube that you are free to watch if you need to. But let's go ahead and divide by negative 4 here. And since I divided by a negative, I have to flip my sign. And the negative 124 divided by that should give me 31. Now I want to add that 2 to the other, or excuse me, add the 1 to the other side. And I get 4 is greater than or equal to x. I don't like that answer yet. As a math teacher, I really want that x to be on the other side. And so here's this second point here from the margin, is when we do this, what we should do, we're going to move the x over to the left, the 4 over to the right, but since it was an inequality rather than equals, we have to flip the sign. In other words, it was pointing at the x, we need to keep it where it's pointing at the x. So now it says x is less than or equal to 4. Those two statements, they mean the same thing, but I like this one better because the x is on the left, and I think that just makes more sense to people. Now I want to put this on my number line. So I'm going to go to the 4. I'm going to say less than or equal to. Less than or equal to goes this way. This time I was running out of space, so I had to put it on the line. If I put it on the line, I want to make sure it's dark enough that the teacher can see what I'm doing. Okay, then my inequality says it goes from negative infinity all the way up to a positive 4. We're going to put a bracket there because it has an equal to, and the parentheses because it never gets to negative. So here's my interval, here's my inequality, here's my graph. I've got all the pieces I need. Okay, take a few minutes to think of what do you need to remember? What do you need to remember from this video? There's a couple of hints in the margins. You can always use what's up there in the margins and put that in the what to remember lines. That's the end of this video. I'll post the other one if you want to see some of the other examples.